Hello, and welcome back to the Comic Books Matter podcast. I'm your host, Jesse, and with me today is the man sailing the DC universe into an infinite frontier currently. He's pitting all your favorite rich super dads' kids against each other in Robin. And he also writes Nailbiter Birthright, which is, I believe, wrapping up soon. Gotham Future State coming up. And one of my older favorite comics, which I have right here, I pulled it out because I knew I was talking to you, Masks and Mobsters.
Oh, man, right on. Yeah, that's really
Joshua
cool to
Williamson.
see. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for showing that stuff. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that's the first book I ever read of yours was Masks and Mobsters.
Oh, that was actually that was a book that came from back 10 years ago, more than 10, 11 years ago. I was in Brian Michael Bendis' writing class at PSU, and one of the assignments was genre mashups. We had to do a genre mashup, and I was like, I'm gonna do gangsters and superheroes, and that was so that first issue was my assignment, that script, and so I wrote that. He gave me an A. I remember when I got the script back, and all he wrote on it was just A plus, and I was like, I went up to Bendis after class, and I was like, where are my notes at? And he was like, this is your note, like the A plus is your note. And I was like, nah, dude, that's not how this works. Like, you gotta tell me what you actually thought of this. That's what I'm here for. But then after that, like maybe a few months, actually a year after that, almost a year after that, I had started talking to Mike Henderson about some different projects. And so he had been, talking about doing some different stuff. And so I was like, here, you want to check this out? And we can just do this script and see what happens. We did it. And then I was friends with the people who ran Monkey Brain and was like, hey, and it just became this thing. Like it was kind of, rolled right into making it into this book. And then Mike and I were still getting to know each other. So we were just like experimenting with that book. Like every chapter was something a little different, a little weird. And we brought in some other artists that we were friends with to do some stuff, do some chapters, but we were just having fun with it. And then I got collected in that book. And then Mike and I, we did a chapter of Ninja Turtles together. We did like a Krang special. And then we did Nailbiter after that. But that's why I think Nailbiter worked the way it did, because Mike and I had already done Mask and Monsters together. Like we kind of already knew each other, but also because we were experimenting with that book together, just like doing weird stuff and doing different kinds of storytelling on that book, that I think it got us into a good rhythm by the time we started Nailbiter.
Which is fascinating because like Nailbiter and Birthright were the first two books other than that one I read. So I only read your independent stuff. And then they're like, hey, this Joshua Williamson guy, he's doing Flash. And I'm like, well, Flash is one of my favorite characters.
Oh, me too.
So I should read this because I can't remember who was doing it right before you, but I dropped off by that point.
Yeah, it was Venditti. Venditti was doing it with Brett Booth and stuff. Yeah, and there was Francis and Brian were in there.
But... Yeah, I read all the Francis and Brian stuff, and then I just had to cut books, and so there was just books that like disappeared because at the time I was picking up almost every book, and then by the time Rebirth came around, I was like, well, I have the money now to pick up this entire line for at least the first 3 issues.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. Yeah, I got really lucky with Rebirth. That I was able to come in at that moment. It's like when I was a kid, like I'm a big, big DC nerd, and been a big DC nerd like my whole life. And I remember when I was already getting the books, but I was already hooked, and I was getting all the stuff I could get my hands on everything. But I was still learning a lot of stuff about the universes. This is back, 30 years ago. But when they did Zero Hour, they did all those Zero issues for the entire line.
Yeah.
Starman came out of that, and there was a new Manhunter book, and but they also did like just Zero issues for all the books. And so I got all of that. And I remember getting all of Zero Hour and loving it. And that kind of like it sent me to that next level of DC fan, I think, where I was like, I'm just gonna get everything for a while. And it didn't last forever, but I still got I would say, that those first few months I was getting like every single book I get my hands on, for DC. But I got lucky with Flash Rebirth that I was able to come in when I did. And when I pitched for Flash, there was no Rebirth. Like Rebirth, I think it had been I don't even think Rebirth had been a conversation yet. I think maybe like between Dan and Jeff, they had maybe talked about it a little bit. But when I pitched it to Dan, I pitched him twice. The first time I pitched to him, he said no. There's this whole thing about that where I was running late to meet with him, and I thought I was supposed to meet him at 3:30, but I guess I was supposed to meet him at 3. And so his assistant texted me because they knew me, and they were like, "Where are you? Where are you?" And I was on a panel.
Yeah.
And they were like, "You're supposed to meet Dan, and it's like 3:15." And I was like, "No, I'm meeting him at 3:30." And they were like, "No, you're meeting him at 3." And I was like, "Oh my God." So I like ran out of the panel and ran to the booth. And originally we were gonna go outside and like go for a walk or something, but I basically missed like almost a whole half hour by that point, just getting there. And I could tell he was frustrated about other things, you know. Now I know more, like after talking to him a lot, I know there were other things going on that day.
Yeah, for sure.
But here's this guy that he doesn't know. Like he barely knows me. I'd done a couple DC jobs at that point over the years. I hadn't worked at DC in 3 years, and he was just like, you know, like, what do you want, basically? And so I was like, I really want to write the Flash. And I like, it was funny. So we went into this storage room to talk about it. And he only had like 5 minutes. And so I was just like, all right, I want to write the Flash. I gave my whole pitch. And I didn't realize it, but because I ran, I was like sweaty and bright red faced, and I was so pumped up from running that I was straight out yelling at him, like just straight up like yelling in this dude's face about, "You're gonna give me the Flash." And he was like, "No." And then he explained why, and he was like, "This is what I think, this whole thing." He was like, "We can talk again some other time, whatever, blah blah." And I'm like, "All right, cool." I probably was just like a maniac, you know. I probably looked like a total crazy person. So then at New York Comic Con, we sat down and you know, we had a couple of laughs about it because I was on time and I was much more calm that time. And I was like, "All right, here's my plan." And I laid it out for him, and he was like, "I love it, let's do it." And then it was like, oh, it's gonna be like a 12-issue Flash thing, like an evergreen 12-issue Flash thing. And then gradually that morphed into what it became because of Rebirth. It became like, okay, it's gonna be double ship, and you're gonna take over this book, and you're getting #1, and all that. And I did not. That was never part of like my initial pitch. But then once they told me all that stuff, then I started really like digging in and being like, all right, cool, I love this character. What would I do, you know, and how would I do it? Having all these big plans and all this stuff I wanted to do. You know, kind of boiling down what the first arc was going to be, the first 8 issues. And then from 9 on, like 9 is written a certain way to basically tease out the whole 100 issues. Yeah. So it's like from 9 to 100, it was all one big block. And then 1 through 8 was the initial arc. But yeah, dude, it was wild. Because I didn't really like, at that time, I hadn't worked at DC. Not only had I not worked at DC, I didn't really talk to anybody at DC in a long time. I had known a couple editors from years before, but I didn't really know anybody. I hadn't talked to really anyone in years. There were some people there that I kind of like knew a little bit, but like even creator wise, dude, I didn't know anybody. Like Scott and I had known each other for a while, but we were just like acquaintances, you know. We were like cool with each other. We see each other at conventions and stuff like that, but we weren't like close like we are now. But it's like, yeah, there were no creators. Like even with someone like Jeff, like I hadn't talked to Jeff in like, I don't even know, like 3 or 4 years, you know. So when I went in there, I just went in like super blind, just with a pitch, and that all was because of Nailbiter. Like Nailbiter and Birthright were doing really well, and Dan had seen the sales on Nailbiter, and that was why he took the first meeting, because he saw how well the first Nailbiter trade had sold, and was like, all right, I'll take a meeting with this guy because this thing sold well. But then I was able to like actually win them over with the pitches I was doing, and then they liked the stuff I was doing and the scripts were coming in, and they liked them. And then that, you know, that led to me getting the exclusive. Like so once they started reading it and seeing what I was doing, they were like, it was pretty wild, dude. I think that was one of the things that was crazy. They offered me the exclusive before issue 1 had come out. Like they were just like, they liked what I was doing, and they were like, all right, cool, we'll sign you to an exclusive for this many years and stuff. But yeah, man, it was nutty, dude. Like I look back as that was 5 years ago, like right now. And so it's such a strange thing. And then like to see how much has happened in the last 5 years, it's nuts, dude.
It's bonkers when you say like Rebirth's been 5 years, because it feels so short. It feels extremely short. Maybe it was the double shipping that made it feel so short.
It was the double shipping, I think. I mean, yeah, to think that 5 years ago was just Rebirth. I don't know. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff we get into about like Rebirth and why it feels like that amount of time was kind of like a really, it doesn't, I don't know, it was such a short little snippet, you know. But
and like New 52 felt like a whole era, because I don't know, something about New 52 just felt like it lasted forever.
I know, but it was also only 5 years.
Yeah, it's so wild. Time's weird. Time's stupid. Yeah, I guess writing the Flash, you know, time's kind of stupid.
Oh, but dude, think about this. All right, so when I was when I was really starting, we were talking about Spider-Man before we started recording, right? So when I was really getting like super hooked on Spider-Man, like I was already reading it, and I had a subscription to Amazing, and I was like, Spider-Man 2099 was about to come out, and I was like super pumped about that. A lot of that time period, they were doing this promotional stuff for like 30th anniversary of Spider-Man. And I remember thinking, like, man, 30 years ago, that seems like so far ago, right? Because you're talking about like, if you're looking at like 1992, what was going on in the Spider-Man books then, and you're like, man, 1962 feels like it's literally, I mean, it's lifetimes ago, but it feels super long ago.
Yeah.
And now there's the same amount of time between that and now, pretty much. Like, that is how weird time is with comics. Like, it's funny when I'm talking to, sometimes I'll talk to editors that work at DC, and I'll realize they weren't alive when like Image was formed. And I'm like, oh man, like you are super young. But it's like, yeah, it just kind of clicks in my head as some of that stuff, how time is so strange in comics. And we look at like when 1 year later happened, that was 5 years before New 52.
Yeah.
And when I think about that, like what was going on at DC and that little brick of time, man, it feels like it's weird how for a while there it was like all of the DC universe took place within 10 years, right? That was kind of the thing for a little bit, like Superman had been for 10 years. But each one of those 5-year markers to me feel like 10 years.
Yeah.
I feel like such huge gaps in between there, but they're not. They're just 5 years. It's pretty nuts.
Yeah, it's wild to me because like my dad is 62, I think, currently.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, Batman just celebrates 75 years. Batman's not much older than my own father, who doesn't seem that old to me because I'm around him all the time.
That's nutty, dude.
And like for me, I'm 27, so I'm not like super young, but I'm not super old either yet. I'm like right in the middle. And so when I hear people talk about, yeah, man, I started reading comic books in New 52, I'm like, wow. When?
Oh, let me tell you something. There was somebody recently who was tweeting at me, and I would answer their questions occasionally. This is what I didn't realize this over the last like 2 years, I would say. Not even 2 years. This last year, since one person would ask me questions occasionally, and I'd answer very politely, whatever. And I don't engage that much on socials, mostly because of time.
Yeah, I get that. You write a lot of stuff, so
I have no time on my hands. Like it's bad. I never have time. So one time I answered one of their questions, and they responded basically saying they just started reading, and they were really knowledgeable. Like they were asking questions that came from a place that I would have believed this person's been reading, at least since, like you were saying, New 52, right? It's like 10 years ago. And then they were like, oh, I just started reading in 2018. And I was so shocked by that. I know it sounds weird because like it's great. It's great. There are new people coming in, new people discovering DC. But it definitely, and they had a lot of opinions. And so I was like, man, you've been for 2 years. I was like, it's awesome. I'm glad that you discovered this. I'm glad you came in. But at the same time, I was like, whoa, like, yeah, like, that, I don't know, it's cool. I'm glad that they're still getting new people. Because we hear that sometimes there's never any new people. So it's nice to know there are new people coming in.
And I know there's stuff that doesn't age well in everything. Anything that's old, something didn't age well in it. That's just how things go.
Yeah, or I mean, it depends. Like I'm not gonna say what it was. I was watching this Brian De Palma documentary, and he was talking about this, or he was like, everything is so judged in the moment that sometimes things you can have the opposite. You can go back and look at something and be like, oh man, this is great. And like there's actually some movies that I didn't like over my life, right?
Yeah,
movies I've watched that I'm like, oh, I didn't like that movie. That now I'm rewatching them to see if did I miss something? Was it not for me at that time? What was going on? I have this one friend that was in a relationship for a long time, and he hated like every movie he saw for a while. Like I would bring up movies, and I'd be like, well, you don't like that movie? And he's like, no, man, I didn't like that movie. I didn't like it. And I'm like, who would you see it with? And it was like if it happened while he was in that relationship, that was why.
Yeah,
like, he was always that. So I'm like, all right, let's watch it again. Let's just chill out, mellow out. Like we'll watch it again. And so for me, like there were 2 books. I'm not gonna say what they were, but there were 2 comics that I really didn't like 20 years ago. Because I was working at a comic book store, and I read these 2 books, and I really didn't like them. And recently, I was rereading these runs, and like I was telling you before we started recording, I got to these two stories, and I read them, and I was like, yo, these are so good. Why did I not like these then? Like, what was going on? Part of it was because it was monthly, and I think that like that was definitely an example of something that read better in a trade.
Oh yeah,
I remember when it was coming out, and just being like, oh my god, this thing is like never ending. And then now I read it, and I'm like, oh, this is so good. Like wow, how is this so good? How did I miss it back then? But but yeah, I can go back and forth. I don't know. It's there are some books that I will check out that I definitely am like, wow, this is kind of a struggle to read occasionally, like there's something about it and stuff. But then there's some you read and it's just you can pull you right back in, like saying before, I was rereading Starman, and that immediately like brought me, pulled me in. And yeah, it just depends. It just depends on what it is.
That was what I was gonna say, that like some of the stuff doesn't age well, but I think at least for me, maybe because that's how I grew up, but with DC and everything, once you get into that universe, all that history is super consumable. Like it's not as complex once you start getting into it. Or still with me, and I read a lot of both now as an adult, but like still with Marvel, I'm like, wait, when did this character get here? And I have to like go through like 50 footnotes to figure it out. And that can get too complex, but that's like the nice thing about Marvel is these characters are so intertwined on the Marvel side, where DC, they can stay pretty separate, and that's why you can consume a bit faster because not everybody's tangled up with each other.
Yeah, it's interesting how if you were reading Batman and Superman in the 90s, those books were so in their own world.
Yeah.
Like you could really, and even Justice League, where it didn't have up until, Grant does JLA in 97.
Mm-hmm.
That's when they started getting connected. But before that, you could read Justice League, read Batman and Superman, and they were not connected. Like they were, but not really. I mean, like when you think about things like No Man's Land and stuff like that, like they were happening, that's later in the 90s, but it's, they were definitely not as connected. Like the crossovers were a little less. We do a lot of crossovers now, and I think it's okay because I love crossovers.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like not just crossovers, but I love characters appearing in each other's books and
me too
and stuff. I figured this out when I was I figured this out a few years back, where I was like, oh, I think my favorite superhero trope is the team up. Like, just team ups and crossovers. That's part of why I think I worked on all these events at DC the last 5 years, because I've just been like, I love that stuff. I like the interactions with the characters. That's my favorite. When I say team ups, it's partly that. Like, I like every once in a while, just putting two characters together and seeing what happens, right? Like, and what they would really say to each other in these moments. I think a lot about stage plays and how, like, if you ever go see the theater, sometimes you can get really engaged by just like, it could be an empty stage and it's just like two actors doing a really good job, like really performing really well, and they're like bouncing off each other, and you can see that chemistry. I think about that a lot, like, and they get really dramatic with each other at times, and then what's cool, if you're watching theater and you can tell when two actors are like, how do I put this? They're like challenging each other, like I'm gonna outact you kind of thing. And you can see them bouncing off each other, and they get almost like a little over dramatic where they're just playing and having fun. I can also relate with comics, where it's like you working with your editor, working with the artist, other writers working with each other. Like Scott James and I, like we were saying, I talk to James every day. I think it's funny sometimes. I think we don't talk every day, but then I realize we do talk every single day. And he and I definitely bounce off each other. But yeah, if you get me, Scott, James in a room together, we start speaking some weird language. Like we've heard this from the editors, where there are times where they've been in a room with us, and the three of us will start just like talking about not just story, but we'll start talking about DC history.
Yeah.
And because James, Scott, and I know it really well, like you get the three of us in a room, we will start speaking in some kind of like weird language. The editors are like, I have no idea what they're talking about. And we'll just be like, and this will be awesome. Oh man, this will happen, and it'll tie back to this, and nobody will see this Easter egg, but we'll know, and it'll be fun, and like we're gonna do this crazy thing, and then what about this? And we start going down these like holes and stuff. But it's really fun to do. But again, like I like that kind of energy, and I think putting that into the books is some of the stuff I really like to do.
Yeah, and I think with your DC work in general, it's never kind of not a team book in a way, because even Flash was very Flash family focused, and
that took me a while to realize.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
But that was like the core of that book was like the Flash is a family. This is a family dynamic, and it built slowly, because I think it wasn't until like your second or third arc that you had Kid Flash show up, and there was the Shade arc.
Yeah, I had him around in the beginning, but then the second arc was really where he became like part of the book.
Yeah,
it was like that. He was around, but like
yeah.
I
And then by the
started.
end, everybody's back.
Yeah, well, that was my goal from the beginning.
Like,
If I
I'm reading it and I see all these characters, and I'm like, okay, Dad, you gotta look at this. You gotta look at this right now. Like,
Yeah, dude, I was trying to get everybody back for so long. I mean, I think that very first meeting I had, I was like, I originally wanted Max Mercury to be in the very first story arc. He was supposed to be there. But this is partly because, again, like when I started writing the book, I didn't know what Rebirth was yet. And I think they were still working it out. Like Jeff knew, but because I hadn't been talking to them for a long time. I hadn't been brought in to like what was really going on yet. So when I first started plotting out the first 8 issues, I was like, oh, okay, here's what I want to do. I want to have Jesse Quick in this story. I want to have Max Mercury. Like they live in Central City. They get hit by the lightning. They'll get powers, like all this stuff. And I remember having this meeting and Jeff was like, no, because if we introduce Max Mercury, it's Max Mercury. Like we're not doing a thing where it's like, oh, he's Max Mercury in name only, right? And I remember being really like happy about that, because that was when we started really having those conversations about, and then it took like 2 weeks later before when they finally told me that Wally was coming back, which then changed everything,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But then I was like, oh, okay, well that makes sense. Well, now I got to figure out how to bring these people back, and then started having these conversations with them, and the challenge is always like finding the best story reasons why to bring them back, and then the right timing, and so it was like it took a while. Like it took me 2 years to get Bart back. It took me the 4 years to get Max and Jesse back, but and Wally, like I was always trying to get Wally in the book, and they weren't going to let me for a while. I got to have him at the beginning and then issue 9, and it wasn't until I pitched Flash War they were like, oh, well, if you're going to do that, it means that Wally needs to be in the book. And I was like, yes, like give me my boy. Let me run with him for a little bit. It'll be fine. And those are some of my favorite issues. Like I think the book, like I'm happy with it in a lot of places. Recently I had to for this other thing I had to do for DC, I had to like look up every character I had created over the 100 issues. And so I was just going through like every issue being like, did I create somebody for this? Okay, I did create somebody. All right, cool. So I had to look at all 100 issues, and by the time I was done, I was like, you know what, I'm proud of this. Like I made something that was cool, and we made this like big, gigantic, epic story that if you read it from beginning to end, it all adds up. Like you can tell I was telling one big story the whole time.
Yeah. And like for someone who is like a massive Flash fan, I don't have any Flash tattoos yet, but in general, like my second biggest runs are Flash runs. I have Batman runs, and then I have Flash runs. Those are the two big ones, and then Green Lantern.
That's me too. Yeah.
And so and so reading your run, I was like, okay, let's see what he's gonna do here. And then you introduce Godspeed, and at first I'm like, okay, this is another rival speedster. Like this is how it goes. But Godspeed's such a cool design. First off, cool name, and then his backstory is maybe out of all of the 3 main Reverse Flashes the most compelling, because like Ebard is like, you're just a brat. Like you're just a brat that didn't get told.
Didn't get what he wanted.
Yeah, and then with Zoom, there's a tragic backstory with Zoom at times, but also he's just so maniacal. There's no redemption in him at all. He's almost the devil in a lot of ways next to Thawne. But with Godspeed, like at first he's trying real hard to do what's right, and he thinks he's doing what's right.
He really believes he is the whole time. I mean, that's why I felt like, and he was built to die. Like he was always built to eventually figure it out and then get killed by Thawne. It just took us a while to get to that. I really like writing him, and he actually helped me figure out a lot of the voices of the book, because it was like Barry's hard to write sometimes, because Barry is very much like I put this, he can be a little morose at times, but he's just a very plain person. Like he's a very much like, I'm not trying to word this, but I also love writing jerk characters. Like when I was doing the Image books, like when I did Ghosted and Nailbiter, I always liked having like a jerk character there. And you know, with Birthright doesn't really have any jerk characters in it necessarily, but I liked having that role. And so with the Flash, I had August, and August was a little bit like, he's not as clean cut, you know,
Yeah.
like Barry's so clean cut, and having Godspeed, who wasn't, you know, August not being so clean cut, it allowed someone for Barry to bounce off of. And I think that really helped me like shape the voice of the book. And then, you know,
Yeah.
Wally took the place of that time, sort of Wallace. And like, it was always the easier issues when Barry had someone to bounce off of. Like, you know, later on when I would write with him and Captain Cold together, like Captain Cold is obviously a jerk, and that helped bounce each other off that stuff. But yeah, dude, that's my I'm proud of that run. I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
glad I got to do it.
But the second thing about the run that when I was reading it, because there was a brief moment where I had to drop, and I picked back up and I picked up all the issues I missed. So I think I might be missing one issue of your run, and I think that's one of the button crossover issues.
Oh my god, dude! Yeah, those are
because they're just hard to find.
Yeah.
But it was year one is when I got back on.
Oh yeah.
And so there's like 5 issues where I was missing for a bit, but I got back on year one. And I love year one stories in general. Like the Wally one was great back when.
Oh yeah, Born to Run is awesome.
Yeah, and I love the Batman ones. I love the Hal Jordan. I love all year one stories, just in general. But this one, I'm like, well, we kind of know Barry. We know Barry's kind of origin. So what can you add to this? And then you added so much, and it was so much fun.
Thanks,
and I was reading it, and I was like, hey. I always judge comics, not fully, but I judge comics from my dad because my dad's a very old school reader, so he doesn't read a lot of new. And I'm like, hey, you read this, and you tell me. And he reads it. He's like, this is great. I should read the rest of the Flash, and then had stuff he didn't like. So I'm like, okay, but I'm glad you like the year one stuff because that's what matters.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, there's some hiccups in there at times. You know, it was weird, man, because I was doing a double ship book, having to write a Flash book every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I was always writing stuff out of order, dude. Like, that was something I was looking at today. I was looking at my productivity over the last year. And I wrote a lot of comics this last year. I wrote 39 comics for DC this last year alone. And so I was like looking at everything, and I was like, man, when I was writing the end of the Flash, I was writing the last 2 issues before I wrote the last like 4 or 5.
Yeah.
So I was always, and that's how it was the whole time, dude. Like, because Howard takes like a year to do a story arc.
Yeah.
So to do that, to make sure it comes out on time, we were double shipped. So it wasn't like he could like kind of race it. He had to be almost done with it by the time the first issue of an arc was coming out. Like he basically had to be writing the late. Pretty much if we were doing an arc together, when the first issue of the arc came out, he needed to be almost done drawing it. Otherwise, we were going to be screwed. So I was always writing for Howard like a year out. So, you know, I'd be writing Flash War in like, you know, I think Flash War started in May, and I was writing it in, I think, October. And that was really the beginning of like, okay, I got this stuff a year out. So year one came out in June. Yeah, it was always like this. This is how it always worked. I was always writing for Howard in like October, and his stuff would come out in like June. And that way, but then the problem with that though is that, you know, I'm trying to like fill in the blanks sometimes, and things add up, and you know, and then, you know, I got thrown curveballs too. It was like there were things going on in the rest of the DC universe that sometimes would change what I had to do. And I'm like, oh man, just trying to figure out how to make these things, all these pieces come together. But that's how it is too when you're working at like a big publisher like DC. You're always kind of like in the mix of doing all this stuff, dude. And especially like I was always trying to reflect everything. Yeah. Like I always tried to make sure that if, you know, something was going on in the rest of the DC universe, that the Flash at least mentioned it, you know, even when Leviathan was happening and Leviathan had like destroyed Argus. I had an issue where Barry talks about Argus being destroyed. Like I was just always trying to do something, you know, really reflecting Metal or Heroes in Crisis or Doomsday Clock. I was always trying to reflect whatever the thing was, even if it was something like going on in Superman and Batman. I would try to like just always reflect it in some way, you know, even a little bit if I could.
No, that's what I felt with you and Tom during Rebirth was you two had like one of the hardest jobs because you had to decide, do we talk about this? Like in your guys' runs, you had to decide like, are we going to talk about what's going on in the rest of the universe? Because Barry and Bruce maybe had the most tie-ins to everything else, because Dark Knight happened during it, Heroes in Crisis happened during your run, so Wally got all screwed up for a bit. Like you had to like really play with the rest of the field or ignore it, and if you ignored it, people are going to question, well, where does this take place?
Oh, I know. That's what I mean, and like I said before, I'm a big like DC nerd, and when I can tell someone is ignoring it, I get annoyed. Like even now when I'm like embedded, when I can tell someone is just trying to ignore something, I get a little like give me something, give me even like a grace note or something, like just to do something to kind of reflect it or whatever. Yeah, it was wild. And Tom and I would talk a lot during that time period, and we would hang out at conventions, and we were always like, that's how the button happened. And originally, did you read all of Tom's Batman?
Yeah, that's one of the few runs I'm proud I have everything of.
You know that arc where Booster Gold goes back in time?
Yes.
And tries to give him birth. So that was supposed to be a Batman Flash crossover.
Oh, okay.
That was actually a story that he and I like figured out in a bar. We were like, oh, Booster Gold's gonna go back in time and create like a new Flashpoint, and the only person who doesn't get changed is Booster, and then it was really Barry. And so like Barry was gonna wake up and find himself in a new Flashpoint and be like, what the fuck? And then piece it together. So that's how we were gonna cross over. And then what happened was that was in October of 2017, I think. So what happened was when I was talking to my editors, they were like, that time period, Flash War was going to come out basically around the same time. It would have been like, it would have been our issues like 45 and 46, I think. And they were looking at what was going on in Flash, and they were like, you can't go from Batman Flash crossover to the very next month Flash War. Like you can't do that because it's too confusing. And so we scrapped it. So I scrapped my whole part of it, and then Tom, went and did it on his own. It's totally different from what we talked about. It's like completely different. But that's how, like, stuff like that. Like we were talking to each other throughout that whole time period, so we knew.
Yeah.
I remember Tom and I had in 2016, we went to a summit to talk about metal, the first metal.
Yeah.
And we went the next morning before we went in for like the second day of the summit. Tom and I met for coffee, and that was when he was like, I know what I'm pitching today, because we were talking about Batman stuff in general, and he was like, I know what I'm gonna pitch today. And I was like, all right, what are you pitching? He's like, Batman's gonna propose to Catwoman. And I remember we had this whole conversation about it right there. I'm not gonna say my opinions on it, but we had like a whole conversation over coffee about it. It was fun, but it's fun to see these things like play out over time. And there's a picture. All right, so there's a picture from that summit where I was joking, and I like took a picture of Tom, and because he had this look on his face where he was like confused or something. And so one day I was gonna post it. This is like a couple months ago. I'm like, I'm gonna post this picture up on Twitter and be like, oh, look at Tom from 2016. And then I realized behind him was a whiteboard with all of these plants on it. And it basically outlined out what was gonna be DC for the rest of 2016, part of 2017, and then a bunch of stuff that did not happen in 2018.
Yeah.
Like there were all these plans we had talked about. We had this whole crazy story that was gonna happen, and none of that happened. And so I was like, I shouldn't post this picture.
Gonna start a lot of rumors.
To know all this stuff. Oh, dude, it was crazy. There's titles on there that I think
you're gonna feed into some sites that want some clicks.
Yeah, that's funny.
It's crazy because the second Batman Flash crossover, was it Aftermath? Was it called?
Oh, it's called The Price.
Oh, The Price. I remember reading that, and it fell out of place too in both your guys' runs.
Well, because what happened was, well, obviously Wally dying. And there were certain things about that were kind of, with that book that kind of made some struggles for the Flash book. But originally, Tom had a different plan for Batman at that time period. It was going to be a couple standalone issues. They weren't going to be connected. And so it was fine to drop this crossover in the middle because it would make sense. And so I wrote that crossover early. And this was the thing about Double Ship. We were writing this stuff out of order a lot of times. Like Tom's actually pretty good about writing things in order.
Yeah.
But I was always writing stuff like out of order. And so part of why I did it by myself was because Tom had like other stuff he had to do. And so they were like, we're going to let Josh take over Flash for this 1 month, right? The Double Ship month. He'll get that 1 month. And so I wrote that stuff like way early. And then Tom decided he was going to make Nightmares. And I was like, oh shit, dude, this means that like in the middle of Nightmares, we're dropping this crossover in. And he was like, oh no, I forgot that. But if you read Nightmares, you can kind of tell that the first couple issues are only standalones. They don't really connect at first. And then when you get the end, you're like, oh, it's all connected. But that was part of why all that happened. I remember the time being like, oh, God, this would make more sense if we did it like this. But, you know, that was a funny one, dude, because the button sold so well that Tom and I originally wanted to do a Batman Flash crossover every year. That was our goals every year. And then never worked out. And then we did the Price one. And I remember, I don't want to tell you the story. But basically, we talked about it again, and then he left the book. That's what I'll say. Like, we were like, oh, let's do it again. And he was like, no, I don't think we're going to. That's actually how I found out he was but, you know.
And honestly, the Price kind of does fit within Nightmares because it's Batman suffering.
Yeah, it's him suffering through all this stuff. And I think people thought it was going to end up being a dream or whatever. But I forget about that crossover sometimes. Like, it's
a good crossover still. It's just, reading in order, it's a little shock to your system a bit.
Well, because, you know, especially with Barry, because Barry and Iris had just gone on like the Force Quest.
Yeah.
And that was the whole thing, was they were going to be gone for a while. And man, it was rough. You know, like Barry and Iris break up like 3 times in that run, right? And the reason they would break up every time was because of me negotiating something with my editors at the time, who like weren't there anymore. But I was always basically negotiating with them of like, well, if you give me this, I can have this. And so often it was they would want Barry and Iris to break up for some reason. It was like, you know, like the first time that they break up in my run is in issue 27 when Iris kills Thawne in the future.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to them about that, and I was like, I want her to kill him in self-defense. Like, I want her to like, and because they were like, we gotta do something big for this issue, and I was like, well, if you think about everything Iris has gone through, she's gonna kill Thawne.
No, that felt natural, 100%.
It makes sense, right? And so they were like, okay, you can do that, but that means that they have to break up after. And I was like, what? And they were like, that you can have her kill him, but their reasoning I did not agree with. But they were like, they have to break up. And I was like, all right, wait a minute. I was like, how about this? And we went back and forth on it. And I used the example of Jeff, where Jeff had he had Wally and Linda break up after Ignition, and they stay essentially apart from Ignition till Rogue War. Pretty much, right? And that's about 18 months in between. You're talking about around 108, maybe a year, I guess. 108 to around, 208 to around 220. So for about a year, they were broken up. And so I was like, all right, 12 issues then. I will have them apart for 12 whole issues. And they were like, okay, that makes sense to us. You can do that. And I was like, it's only 6 months. Did it. Like, double ship wins. But then they wanted her to be in issue 33. And I was like, all right, which is the crossover with Metal. And I was like, that's fine with me, And so we were able to like seed her throughout. So she was never like completely gone. But that happened at the end of Force Quest. It was like, okay. I was like, all right, they're going to get back together. They've gone through all this stuff together. I'm gonna send them on this journey together, and it's gonna be like a husband and a wife. Oh my god, yeah, it's gonna be like a husband and wife book, right? And let's have fun with it. It'll be good. It'll be good times. And then when the Price was coming around, part of like the exchange for us to do year 1 and then something else. I'm forgetting what it was. There was something else going on. They were like, she has to leave him. I was like, all right, fine. All right, let's do it. Let's make it happen. But it was always in exchange for something else. It was always like, okay, so I get to have Wally in the book, or I get to do this, or I get to do that. Let's just get it going. Let's do it. Let's have it. And it always worked out, like, in the end. That's why they break up twice, because of that. It was like I was always negotiating, and that was like something they were like, oh, we want them to break up, but they were never like break them up bad.
Yeah,
It was always like keep them apart for a little bit, bring it back together. But that's also the thing, when you're on a book for 100 issues, there's a lot of comics, so it's like it makes sense, you know, when you think about something like, you know, how often did Peter Parker break up with Gwen Stacy or Mary Jane or
yeah,
anything?
yeah.
100 issue block is a lot. They definitely broke up a few times in that, so you know, it happens. It was all right. At the end, they're together, so everything worked out.
That brings up a question, because
Yeah.
I feel like I get like 100 different answers if you ask 100 different people this question. It's like, how do you feel about your hero, especially the older heroes, getting married, like Barry marrying Iris, Superman, Lois being married?
I feel at this point, oh man, this is a tough question because I think it depends on the character.
Yeah.
Like to me, Barry and Iris are married. Like, I mean, you know, I feel like they're married. You know, it's like they were before, and I feel like they are now in a lot of ways. Like in my head, especially once I got past a certain point in the story, I was kind of like, yeah, they're just married, they're together.
Yeah.
I think at this point, Superman and Lois are just married. You know, I don't think that does anything to diminish his story at all. Me personally, I don't think it does anything. Um, I'm torn on whether or not Batman should ever be married. I'm torn on whether or not this is a tough one. I'm torn if Spider-Man should be married because,
No, I get that.
like,
Yeah.
I grew up with him being married. You know, like when I was a kid, when I started reading, he'd been married for a few years, and when Brand New Day, you know, happened and stuff. But I like all that stuff. I like those stories. Like
Yeah.
I like Spider-Man since Brand New Day a lot. I understand that, but the Spider-Man books getting kind of convoluted were not because of him being married. There was a lot of stuff going on. Like there was a lot of stuff going on in those books that led to that. And as we were talking about before we started recording, like I've been reading Spider-Man monthly since, you know, since like 1990. So it's like I can tell you looking at it that them being married is not what was the problem.
Like my favorite Spider-Man stuff is them domestically married while he was like teaching at a high school. And like
that was good.
And he would come home and it's like, I'm dealing with a Spider-Man issue, and Mary Jane's like, just listen to me as your wife and maybe we can figure this out.
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of why I like Nick's run too. Like I think he right now Nick Spencer kind of tapped back into that at times, you know. Like they're definitely on again, off again in that book right now. Like there's stuff going on, but the times they're on, I think is really interesting. But that's part of what was fun rereading Ultimate Spider-Man recently, was getting to see some of that. And like I was telling you before, I've been rereading Spider-Man since Brand New Day.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of relationship stuff in there. And there's always like new women coming in and out of that book. And I get that that's part of his character. Like I think the thing about Spider-Man, Tom Brevoort wrote this in the Brand New Day hardcover.
Yeah.
He said one of the rules of Spider-Man is if Spider-Man wins, Peter Parker loses. Right, or Peter Parker loses, Spider-Man wins. Like it has to be one or the other, and it's hard when I don't know if I say hard because it seems so silly to say this, but it's like when he's married to Mary Jane, how is he ever losing? You know?
Yeah.
So it's like I understand some of that dynamics, but that's why I say it's a struggle for me to say like is that the correct answer? But again, like I think with you know, with Flash, with Barry and Wally both are married to my mom. You know,
and Wally has twins because honestly, that family dynamic is a lot of fun.
Yeah, he has those kids, man. Like, I'm glad that that's kind of like a thing and it's not going away again. And I was able to bring those kids back and get things running with all that stuff to get it going. There's a lot of meetings, man. Me asking about them kids, me asking about that cast.
There's like Josh was here again asking about the kids.
Oh, dude, I was always like, I have questions every summit. When can I do this? Can I have Bart back? Like all the time. Can I do this? And seeing what would happen and then being like, but I won eventually. Like I was able to get everything back. And that's why with Infinite Frontier, I felt like that scene in Infinite Frontier 0 where Barry tells Wally, like, you're the Flash again.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna be the Flash here while I'm gone. That's why I wrote that scene, because I was like, I feel like I needed to complete this thing that I had been doing for 5 years with those characters. Like, you know, it's like writing the stuff from Flash Rebirth 0, you know, 5 years ago, where the two of them meet, and then needing to kind of like put a cap on that now.
Yeah.
Part of why I wrote that scene, because I just wanted to like wrap up that particular narrative before I kind of said goodbye for a little bit again. I mean, I think it's fun. I'm still writing Barry in Infinite Frontier in the miniseries this summer. He's in it a little bit, so I'm still writing him, and I have a bunch of stories stuck in my head that are like big DC things that we're planning that will have Wally in them. So I know I'll get to write Wally again, not long from now.
But talking about Infinite Frontier and like just your love for DC as a whole, like the history of it, everybody that's set to write all these books for the whole line feels like they love the history, but not only that, they love the idea of getting new people in, right? Because you talked about
you mean like new readers or new creators?
New readers and new creators in. Like everybody, it feels like everybody's like loving the lore and history of the universe, but also trying to make space for everybody to come back and everybody to join in on this for the first time ever. And because I'm reading Infinite Frontier, it's very old school, late 90s, early 2000s DC in a lot of ways. Not how it feels to me, at least. But it's so new.
That's from me. That's who I am too.
Yeah, but it's so new reader friendly in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and I think that we had talked a lot about this, about wanting to get new readers, and I feel like there's a worry sometimes that a new reader is going to get lost in the continuity. But I'm like, listen, you have to think about who the readers are now. These are readers who have seen Spider-Verse. They watched Game of Thrones. They've seen these things. They've seen the Marvel movies. They can process, or they can let themselves go along for the ride sometimes. Even if they don't get every little thing, they can go along for a ride. And then if they don't get every little thing, there's a million resources for them to look it up, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that there was a fear for a long time of like, we have to hold everyone's hand. And I don't necessarily agree with that. But I think there's ways of making things kind of a mix between new reader plus embracing these things in the past. And that's really what Infinite Frontier was about for us, was being like, all that stuff happened. Here are the pieces you love. And then let's just say, like, it happened, cool, let's get going, and then do new cool stuff, which is what so much of Infinite Frontier was just like, let's all start new chapters. But that's like the twist, though, is like, it's like Darkseid says at the end, it's like, when you're reading a book, every new chapter just gets you closer to the end of that book.
Yep.
And the end of that book is always Darkseid. Like, he's always going to be the end. And so that was part of what we were trying to do with that. But yeah, dude, all the creators, you can really tell that, this sounds weird maybe, but I like listening to creators just have an opinion on the character.
No, I agree.
They're not just coming in just to kind of like do whatever on it. It's not just a job. They have a passion for that character. They have a passion for what they're doing, and they really want to come in and just be like, I have, an opinion on this character. I mean, look at what Philip Kennedy Johnson is doing with Superman. He obviously has opinions on Superman, what he wants to do with it. And that's the stuff that I find most engaging, is when I can listen to these characters talk about it. And, that's why when we're doing Infinite Frontier, we're doing a Secret Files, I very specifically picked out the 3 writers that I'm working with on the Secret Files, which is Brandon Thomas, Stephanie Phillips, and Dan Waters. And the reason I picked them was because in reading their stuff, like, because I've known Brandon for a while, and he actually is like a big DC fan. He used to do stuff like covering DC a long time ago, and so I know he knows DC well. I know Dan Waters is like a huge nerd about it. I know Stephanie's favorite character is Green Arrow. Like, she knows these things really, really well, and they all have opinions on them, and they have their own little thoughts and theories about this stuff. And you can tell when you're reading their books that they have this passion for it. And so that's why I was like, those are the 3 that I want, because they were newer, and I obviously wanted new voices, but also it's like they know it. Like, they're not, and not to say everyone should know every little thing. You don't definitely. I don't want people who feel like they have to know, because here's an example: is looking at like Rom V. Right? Like, Rom doesn't know everything about DC Comics, and he and I have talked about this. Like, we've had conversations. We have like we do a Zoom like about once every month or two, and just talk and catch up with each other. And him and I have talked about this, where it's like he has a certain level of freedom because he has read up on a lot of stuff and he loves the stuff, but he definitely has a lot of his own opinions, but he's not precious about things. And that's something we joke about this. I can definitely get precious about stuff. Like, I can get very like, no, this is how it should be, like this. And I have to remind myself, like, no, I got to blow this up sometimes. And I got to do something different with it. And he has a very different perspective. And I think he's able to bring that to those books. And he's able to bring this perspective of, he has been reading DC for, 20, 30 years. He just started reading comics, 10 years ago, I think? Long ago, So it's like, because of that, I think it's a good, just different perspective on these things. And he has an opinion on the books he's working on, and the characters, and you can kind of go back and forth with him about character motivations, and he has a fresh perspective. And that's the kind of stuff I think is really cool about all the books that we're doing now. And it's like, and then you get someone like James on Batman, who has such a history of Batman already.
Oh, yeah.
And but not only have, it's really interesting to think about, like, and I guess I have the same thing with Flash now that I'm thinking about it, but it's like James has loved Batman like his entire life, and now there's like a 10-year brick of Batman that he essentially has been involved with, because it's like he started writing with Batman #8, doing backups with Scott. So really, he's been doing this since New 52. He's basically been involved in Batman in some form or another almost that entire time. It's such an interesting thing to be like, the history of this character so well, and then there's a chunk of it that you made. Like, there's something I think really powerful about that and cool. But yeah, dude, I think we're doing a lot of just like fun stuff with Infinite Frontier, just trying to mix it up and do things different. Like this mini that we're having this summer, it's not even really it's weird. We call it an event. I don't even think it should be called an event. It's more of like, it leans a little bit harder into like 52. 52 was, where it's like, it's different storylines that kind of are going to intersect into one by the end. But it's something super different than anything else we've done. Also, because like metal and death metal were like, Scott would call them, they were like big, loud concerts. They were rock and roll shows. And we were like, okay, so for Infinite Frontier, let's do something a little bit quieter, a little bit different. Let's show the aftermath of that, let's show this like different kind of story before we make things really big and loud again next year or at the end of this year. Like it definitely lets us kind of tell these like smaller stories for a little bit.
It feels like the difference between Infinite Crisis and Identity Crisis. Dude, Infinite Crisis is the world. Yeah. Identity Crisis is the JLA, and yes, there's repercussions, but it's the JLA.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it's funny, like that's a lot of what Infinite Frontier is to me. Is it's much more of like a smaller story. It's weird because it's all a multiverse and there's all kinds of crazy things that happen in it, but in a lot of ways it's a smaller story about these characters and kind of what's been going on. And there's like one of the plots is Director Bones, and how he, for a long time Director Bones has had issues. First it was metahumans, then it was aliens, and that was mostly because of the Supergirl TV show, but eventually it was aliens. And then now he's like, the multiverse is a threat. Like that's how he sees it. And that's kind of what the story is about, is there's a part of Bones that is like, yeah, the multiverse is a threat. And what does that mean now? And also the fact that people know what the multiverse is. He's like, that the general public should not know what the multiverse is. They should not know that's a real thing. We should get rid of that. Like, and that's part of the plot of it. And so it's a very different kind of story that it's much more of like a mystery and like a conspiracy story than it is like this big giant. And don't get me wrong, there's explosions all the time. There's like all kinds of big stuff going on, but it's a very different kind of story than I think we've done for a while. I think people would be surprised by it. It's beautiful. Like Domenico is doing really great stuff with it, but it's a very different kind of book than we've been doing. It's gonna be interesting. I don't know. I mean, that was one of the things. I mean, we can talk about like create our own stuff a bit, but it's like that's part of what post Flash has been for me, is that for a long time I was doing create your own for a really long time, and that was where a lot of my passion was. And like when I was breaking in, I was so hardcore about create your own, and I would do jobs for Marvel and DC, and there were things I wanted to do, and I always felt like more of a connection with DC. Like there's stuff at Marvel I want to do too, but with DC there was just something kind of a connection there that was different than with Marvel. And but my passion was always to create your own. And then in 2015, I was in the middle of, I was doing Birthright, I was doing Nailbiter, but Ghosted was ending. And I remember just thinking like I wasn't burnt out on Create Your Own, but I felt tapped out. I felt like I had done enough at that point. And I remember I pitched this book. I pitched a book to Image, and they kind of like soft greenlit it, but I could tell they didn't like it. You know what I mean? They were like, we're greenlighting it just because, but we don't like it. Like, and I was like, oh, that sucks. And so we decided not to do it. And then I pitched a book to Skybound, and I remember they were just like, this isn't better than Nailbiter or Birthright. Like, you're not pitching something that's better. And so I felt really burnt out on it.
Yeah.
So I was like, man, what am I going to do? And I was in this weird spot because like I had been doing all these books for everyone else, like I was doing RoboCop for Boom, I was doing Captain Midnight and Predator for Dark Horse, and everything was ending. Like all that stuff was ending, and I was like, how I don't want to do with this stuff, and I was like, okay, well, I'm, that's when I started. Scott Snyder came to me at a convention. We were just like BSing with each other at my table, and he was like, "You should try for Flash. You like Flash? You should try."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, they're never gonna give me that book. That will never happen." I was like laughing. I was like, "They will." I remember telling him at my table, I'm like, "Dude, they will never give me the Flash." And so when I got the Flash, because of what Flash was at its core, it was the DNA of my Flash run was built around Rebirth. And Rebirth was so much about getting back to a core ideal for this character in this book, right? So much of my DNA of that book is that. It's like doing the Flash book the way a Flash book should be done. That's part of the foundation of that book at that time. And so I didn't really at times bring in the same level of stuff that I would do, say, on a Create Your Own book at times.
Yeah.
I wasn't bringing in the same kind of energy that I did to Nailbiter and Birthright or other Create Your Own books, because the rules were so different. And I think DC at the time, they were very much about, this is how this book should be. And so I didn't deviate from that very often. I think there's an issue here or there, but for the most part, I wrote it. And I think that's why I was talking about being precious before, because it's like I was a huge fan of Jeff and Mark's Flash runs.
Yeah.
And it's like I basically was doing a book that felt like a sequel to those books. If you go back and read Flash from Mark Waid's run all the way through the end of Jeff's run, you can tell that Jeff's run is a sequel to Mark's.
Yeah.
They run with each other, and that's how my run was too. I basically was like, you can tell, like, I do a lot of stuff that connects with both of their runs, and it runs with it. So I didn't really deviate from that very often. And there's goods and bads to that, right? Like, yeah. I think at times it made it so I was making a very, like, I don't want to say basic, but I was doing the Flash book. And like I said, I'm proud of it, and I was happy working on it, but I was doing a Flash book that was engineered to be a specific kind of Flash book.
Yeah.
And so now, once I got away from Flash, we started talking about things like doing Robin, doing Infinite Frontier, doing books that hadn't been announced yet, doing stuff like the Red Hood stuff with Future State that eventually became, Gotham Future State. My goal for all that was to get away from Flash. And we had a lot of conversations about books I could do. And my problem was, I felt like all the books we were talking about, outside of like one or two that we were kind of talking about, but for the most part, I was like, I feel like that would be either expected, or I don't say a challenge, but yeah, like almost didn't see a challenge there. So I was like, I don't know if that's the book for me to do. So I was like, all right, I got to kind of lean away from that and try something totally different. And that's why Robin is drastically different from Flash. Like, they're like completely different kinds of books. Even in terms of pacing, like the pacing in those issues of Robin are super different. Like the Flash, on top of being a double ship book and being a Flash book, it was just boom. Like the pacing was really fast and sometimes almost smashed a little. So with this one, with Robin, it's not like that at all. Like it breathes a lot differently. Infinite Frontier is the same way. All of them are me doing something different, and I feel like challenging myself in a few ways, taking risks differently with them. And then with Create Your Own too, like now, so dude, it was funny. So like back then, I was like, I'm so burnt out on Create Your Own. Like, I'm just gonna keep doing Nailbiter and Birthright, and I'm gonna kind of take a rest for a minute because it's not clicking for me. And then I immediately, within a year, I was like, I have a ton of ideas. Like, I got a ton of stuff. And so I basically, the last 5 years, I've been like developing and building those ideas, where now I have like a library of stuff that I'm putting together and trying to like work on. But they're all shorter too. Like Birthright's 50 issues long. And Nailbiter now is 40 when you include all of it. So it's like, I don't know if I'll ever do a long run like that again. It's like I feel like a year to 2 years is really kind of it. It's like enough to get like a nice a nice omnibus.
Yeah, no, I get it.
You know, I feel like that's where I'm at with a lot of that stuff. But yeah, just doing that and trying to get back a little bit to create our own in places at times and try to do things, mix it up a little bit, and but also like challenge myself. And with create our own, I mean, Birthright came out 2014. Nailbiter was also 2014, and that's 7 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's like a lifetime ago for comic readers. You know, we were talking about before, it's like 5 years feels like 10.
Yep.
So 7 years, that might as well have been 20 years ago in a lot of ways. So that's me trying to like, you know, step back into that ring, but also make sure the stuff I'm doing is really like solid, you know, nothing feels like a half-ass sort of, you know, half measure. It's
Yeah,
like
no,
just
I get
really
that.
put my work into it. Yeah.
What's really fun too is like this new era of DC feels kind of like the shonen era of DC in a lot of ways too, with James's Batman and the whole Batman line in general. Is like this feels very much like an action shonen, and then you're like, yeah, and you know Robin's going to be a whole tournament.
Yeah. Well, that's because of James. Well, that's because of James and Ben Abernathy are both huge manga fans.
Yeah.
And so because James and Ben Abernathy, who's the group editor for Batman, they're huge manga fans, that's where that comes in. With Robin, I don't know where that came from. I wasn't even really thinking about that at the time. It took a minute for me to realize how much I basically was like letting Naruto slip in. You know, like
Yeah.
I was thinking of different stuff. Like I was thinking of Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat. Like I was looking at a lot of like that kind of thing. And then, you know, there's other tournaments that have taken place in DC. And so I was like looking at all those things. And I wasn't even, I think it wasn't until I was writing issue 2 that I started being like, oh, this really is like in the vein of that stuff that they're doing, you know,
Yeah.
like me and then Gleb, of course, who also likes manga a lot, he started understanding it and bringing that stuff in. Like he picked it up really quickly. I feel like he picked it up before I did, that I was doing that, you know, and he started running with it. And I was like, oh yeah, we're doing Naruto with Damien kind of. So that kind of like, once I realized I was doing that, it was funny because like when I was pitching it to them, I feel like everyone knew it before I did.
Yeah.
Because when I was working on it and I was pitching the whole story, like this big Damien story I had, they were like, "Oh, you mean like in Dragon Ball Z?" Like they would be like, "Oh, you mean like in Dragon Ball Z?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, yeah, like that's exactly right, yeah." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, like in Naruto." And we started going back and forth, and now I realized like, oh, I was doing it this whole time. It just didn't click necessarily that I was doing that because like, issue 4, he is with Ra's al Ghul in that issue for the whole issue. It's just the two of them, and it's a very different issue because it's not like a big action issue. There's definitely a part in the middle that is like actiony because it's like Ravager versus Respawn in the middle of the issue, and there's other stuff going on. But it's like most of the story is just Damien and Raish for a little bit, and it's so different than what I think people are going to expect from it because there's definitely action in those moments, but it's really this like it's sort of a grandfather grandson. They're still antagonistic, but it's a very different, like I think that in the past, I how do I explain that? I think in the past a lot of what's been happening in each issue would have been half an issue before, but instead we're letting it all breathe, and that's why the first arc is like it's 8 issues for the first arc, and even then that's just the end of that story, like and it continues on past that. But that's part of why I think what's been really fun about working on this book is being able to let everything breathe the way that manga breathes, you know, like manga really breathes really well.
And I think it's great too that Damien's a little bit older too than when he was introduced. So you get to have a Damien that will let things breathe, because Damien from Grant's run is just impact. He's just going after everybody as fast as he can. And he's been that way for a long time.
There's a couple scenes that are like that, but I like quiet in comics.
Yeah.
You know, I think that was something that was rough with the Flash, was that Barry is always in his head all the time. And so it was like, it was so rare to get, you know, any scenes in Flash that were quiet. But that's the thing about this, is that Damien can definitely go on little rants and stuff, but for the most part, he's very short and to the point, you know? And so that allowed me to kind of change up the way the dialogue was written and stuff. And I don't know. Yeah, that book is like easily like the most fun I've ever had at DC. And this is like not a knock on anything else I've worked on, but it's clearly like the most fun I've had. And it's the most like fluid and the most like on the same page with the editor and with the artists I think I've had, where we all kind of just like click and we're all very understanding of what the story is going to be.
Yeah.
And then having the freedom to just kind of tell this cool, Damien story that I really want to tell, that eventually will get back to him being the Bat family, but allowing him to kind of be alone for a little bit and just kind of grow by himself for a moment and learn something about himself it's been really fun. Yeah, it's been awesome.
Yeah, and I want to thank you personally that you brought Connor Hawk back, because again, that's my era of DC, like seeing Roy back in Infinite Frontier, spoilers, but seeing Connor back and Robin, everybody, just give me everybody. Like
I'm trying, dude. Let me tell you, I'm gonna get them all back.
Jade and Obsidian.
Obsidian. I'm gonna get them all back. It just might take some time, but I'm gonna get everybody back.
Like, I'm here for it. But
Connor was funny because when I came up with the idea for the book, he was like immediately. I was like, oh, I want Connor Hawk in this book, and I knew exactly his entire role. I know it was all gonna play out, the whole thing, and at first they were like, this is one of the only things when the editor was just like, no, and their reasoning was they just didn't know him. They just didn't know him. And I'm like, listen, he is absolutely perfect for this book. I know that it's not a Green Arrow book, and so I think there was an expectation that if he came back, if he had a Green Arrow book, but I'm like, that's why this is cool, because it's different, and they have so much in common. These two characters, they have so much in common, and so I was like, let me play with that, and again, it's like a fight book. There's certain people we got to bring in, and Connor was one of them. I didn't really bring in like Cass because I felt like Cass didn't have anything to prove. Yeah. But then I also didn't want anybody on the island that would automatically like tell Bruce, and be like, here you. But then I also wanted to make it about Damien and stuff. But there's other characters we kind of explain why they're not in this particular tournament. It's funny, like I don't want to get too much into spoilers, but it's like there are certain people that were like, oh, they're not here. That they might show up later. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly.
Without ruining anything, there might be people that show up as we go. But I don't know, man. That book has been a lot of fun. Like, I mean, the stuff we're doing in DC right now, it's wild. Like, we're planning stuff out so far in advance now, and the conversations we're having, and trying to figure this story stuff out. Like, dude, I can tell you what happens in the DC universe pretty much the end of 2022 easily. Like, I know a little 2023 stuff, but like I can tell you clearly what happens over the next 18 months.
You'll have to say that to after we're done, though, because I don't think you want that out.
No, I'm not going to tell you. No. There's cool stuff in there, though. It's real fun.
Excited.
There's a lot of really fun stuff coming, and it's like there was a moment today where I kind of got to look at some of the plans and look at it as like a big tapestry, and I was like, well, it's really cool stuff that's coming in the next like 18 months in the DCU. Like, just a lot of it's crazy at times to look at it all now, but I think we're really moving and grooving, and there's a lot of new people coming in, and yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I don't know, I'm really happy with the stuff. And like, it's like I've been a DC fan my whole life, and I can see the points that I was happiest as a fan.
Yeah.
And knowing what was working at those times and why it worked. And I remember back in when Countdown to Infinite Crisis came out, I was still working at a comic book store, and I remember when that came out, and I remember the build from that all the way to 52, and 52 started coming out right when I stopped working at a comic book store, so I think it's like I remember buying it after. But that whole block of time, was pretty awesome. There was a lot of really cool, good stuff going on in there. And I think we're coming up on something that's going to be similar to that. I think that kind of energy, but at the same time, it's going to feel new. Like there's a lot of cool stuff coming in. I mean, that's what I think the best times that DC works is when it really like honors the past and then moves it forward. Right. Yeah. That's just the best times for DC. And, like when I started, I feel like sometimes I get my perspective on DC is different sometimes from some either pros or fans, and maybe you can relate to this, but well, for me, when I got hardcore into DC, when I was really like getting it going to the comic store every Wednesday.
Yeah.
At the time I would go on Saturdays, but when I was going every week to get my books, there were 4 Supermen. Batman was not Batman for a minute. John Paul Valley was there. Kyle was Green Lantern. There was Connor Hawke and Wally. There was Young Justice. Like Bart was coming in. Like all this new stuff was adding to the mythology, and all this new stuff was adding to the legacy. And there wasn't so much of a like, this is the definitive version of that character. Like things were kind of different, and they were telling these stories that took these characters in different directions.
Yeah.
And that was what really hooked me, and it brought me in as a new reader. And also having these new sidekicks, like having Tim and Connor and Bart and Cassie, like that is what started bringing me in and hooking me to it. And so now when we have all these conversations, I try to keep that in mind a lot, is that you do look at what's going on right now, where like John is in Superman, and there's Yara, and the stuff with with Tim Fox, and the stuff that's going on in the Green Lantern books with John Stewart. And it's like the fact that we're kind of taking these different directions with some of these things. And then Wally's back, it's Flash. It's and like you said, Connor is back, and all of these pieces. And I think that we're continuing to add a mythology. I think that's really exciting.
Yeah.
It's making the DC universe feel fluid and big again. And that's the stuff that I get really excited about. And we're not ignoring that past. I mean, that was the thing about New 52. And it's like, I don't want to knock New 52 in any way, but wiping away so much of that history, I think it hurt it in the long run during that time period. I could be wrong. I mean, it sold really well, so I can't really say too much. But it's like, I think getting all this stuff back and then just playing with it and trying to find ways to make it all work, which can be tough sometimes. It can be stressful and it's a lot of work, but to make it all work together, I think can be really, really fun and cool.
Yeah, I mean, as someone whose parents said that my third word was Batman, the concept of hyper time is one of the most fun things for me.
Oh, yeah, it makes it easy.
Yeah. In reading the last issue of James's Batman, and like all of a sudden they're like, yeah, and like when that earthquake happened, I'm like, there it is.
Oh,
there it is.
Yeah, dude. That's all I want sometimes. If somebody will mention some stuff, if they'll just mention this happened, I'm like, all right, we're good to go. We're good to go. Like, that's all I want to sometimes. Like, I get real happy with that stuff. Whenever I'm talking to like other writers and they're like, oh, I'm gonna mention this thing, and I'm like, yes, that's all I want sometimes. Give me a little bit of that, and I think it helps with the universe building, and then I mean, that was something that like Jeff was really good at back when he was doing like JSA. He would basically reference all of this stuff from the JSA history and Infinite Ink and all that, and all of these little pieces. He would find ways of pulling it together and using it. And that book was really cool because of it, and there were times you didn't even know what he was talking about. You're like, who is this person? And they had to go back and look at like an old issue of JSA and be like, oh, okay, he's pulling all this stuff together into this thing. It's real cool. I don't know, like I'm excited about where we're at right now with the DC universe. And like I was saying, like, having these new stories, these new characters, but also having all these new creators coming in at the same time, there's a really good energy, and I'm hoping people like what we're doing. I hope that they can see that. They can see that everyone is really working toward this direction to just build this DCU that is like united, but still able to grow and do just cool stuff and not be weighed down by things.
I want to talk about Birthright just briefly before we kind of move into some questions from people who listen. But you're coming up to the end of Birthright. It's 50 issues, you said. I remember picking up the first few issues of Birthright. And I just want to know, how does it feel to be wrapping up this story? Because the Nail Biter, it's very like, it's a horror story that feels like very like a horror movie in general.
But it's a grindhouse. It's a grindhouse thing. Birthright is like the most personal thing I've ever written.
It's super Lord of the Rings. It's super epic, super complex overall. So how does it feel to finally wrap it up?
Dude, it's super weird. It hasn't processed yet because I finished writing it 2 weeks ago, actually. So like 2 weeks ago I wrote the last script, but the last script, I knew the last script, like I've known it for years. Like I knew how it was going to end from the very beginning. And so going in and being able to, write that last one, it took me a while. Like it took me some time to write it. And I don't know if I was avoiding it, but this happened with Flash too. Like writing Flash, when I finished writing Flash, I was just like, well, got to get to that next script. I'm too busy to think about it. And I didn't process that I was done with Flash until the week Flash came out, the last one. And then I was like, then it hit me. right? So a Birthright, I don't know, it's super weird to feel like I'm done with it. Like it's been a part of my life for a long time. I actually had the idea back in 2007, and so I pitched it to Skybound in 2013, and it started coming out 2014. So basically, it's just been a part of my life for like a long time. Even just working on it, I've been working on it for 8 years.
Yeah.
So it's been just this kind of thing that's always there in my brain, and now to feel done with it is strange. Like I learned a lot of lessons from it, but again, it's like the most personal thing I've ever written because it's so much about family and life and a lot of like my own thoughts on life and how your life can change unexpectedly at times.
Yeah.
There's so much of that boiled into that book that it is definitely really strange, but there's also a kind of cathartic like therapy about ending it and knowing how I get to end it the way I wanted, and being able to do 50 issues of a fantasy book, like a fantasy create your own book, is insane. Like, I mean, when people are breaking into comics, one of the things they tell them is don't pitch like a 50 issue fantasy epic.
Yeah.
Like that is literally like, start small. And I had done all that, but when I went to Skybound, I was like, I have this idea for this book, and this is it. Like, this is big epic thing. Here's the whole plan. And they were like, cool, let's do it. And I can't believe we did it. I mean, it's nutty. I mean, me and the artists, we're gonna work on something like immediately afterward, like a new thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's such a strange journey, and to now be done with it, I don't know. I definitely have weird feelings about it. Like it's at the same time, it's like I'm so busy
Yeah.
that I haven't had a moment to sit down to like let it soak in. But I definitely feel kind of weirdness. I'm not sure how to explain it. It's to be something that's so part of you and it's part of your identity in a way, and then to be like, cool, I'm done with that. There's like moments where I look at the last issue, just like rereading it and looking at some of the stuff because it's still being worked on. The last issue's still being worked on,
Yeah.
but it's like I'm done writing it. But there are times where I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh, I want to change this one line of dialogue, or I want to do this, I want to do that, because like it's the last one. Like I don't even, I can't. There's nothing else to be said. But that's part of why also with Birthright, like Birthright, the climax of Birthright happened a long time ago because the climax was him killing Lore. Like him killing Lore and being like, I did it, I completed the journey. That was the climax. And then these last 5 issues are all epilogues to that climax. And so mostly all I'm doing is wrapping up all of the dangling plot threads and leaving a couple here and there. But for the most part, I'm answering the emotional arcs for each character, and then really dealing with the thesis statements about destiny and about your story and your journey, and having control of your life, whether it's destiny or not, and I'm essentially, the last issue mostly answers all that stuff. So I feel good about the fact that in the end, I get to say what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
And exactly how I wanted to end in like an emotional way for the characters. So that all worked out. It is super weird, but I think it's gonna take a minute for it to really settle in and like let go of it, because it's such it's weird to explain when you're working on something. And I didn't work on it every month. Like the last couple of years, we were only releasing like 5 or 8 issues a year. The last like 2 years, 2-3 years. So because of that, it was like I was writing it so differently, and it was such a different fluid when those things were coming in, that it's gonna be really strange to finally like realize it's gone, but at the end of the day, I'm really happy with it.
And I also want to say Nobody Returns was a lot of fun, and it was a lot of fun to have you go back there to the Nobody stuff and kind of go a bit, I don't want to say silly, but like more outrageous with some of the stuff that was going on in it at that time.
Yeah, we were trying to something really different with that one, because what happened was we were talking a lot about horror sequels, and we were like, horror sequels are always like either actiony or silly, and so we're like, let's try action and silly. Let's go over the top with this. But I think when we come back to it and we do did you finish Nobody Returns?
I did. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when we come back to it eventually, we're gonna wait a while. Just like we did the first one, we waited a while in between. But when we come back to it and do the Son of the Nailbiter stuff, that's gonna be like really scary horror stuff again. It will be not. It won't be as over the top actiony. because that was the big thing. We were like, oh, we have car chases, like that's what action movies have. So we put a lot of effort into making it more action oriented. So now with this one, we're like, okay, cool. We're gonna dial it back down to horror and take our time on Son of the Nailbiter, which I'm not sure when it'll come out. It'll be some time. Because like Mike and I, we always like go our own separate ways every once in a while. So we're back to he's doing stuff over here, I'm over there. But that's another person I talk to like every day. We chat a lot about what we're working on and just catch up with each other. And so we're close friends. I was best man at his wedding, and so it's like we're we talk to each other. But yeah, it'll be totally different when we come back to it. It'll be much more horror.
So I have a couple questions. One is from a fellow podcast in front of House of Comics. They ask, with Damian representing the present and future of DC, is it ever hard finding a voice for him that you think will resonate with a younger audience without it sounding like you're pandering to them?
I don't even know if I write it for an older audience or a younger audience. I feel like I write him just the way I hear him in my voice.
That's fair, yeah.
Like I've heard the way that kid talks this whole time. Like I remember, so about 10 years ago, I was doing little tiny jobs for DC, like literally like here's a 6-pager, like here's an 8-pager, here's a 10-pager. And this editor came to me one day. He was like a managing editor. He came to me and he was like, hey, we want you to do an inventory story. We do this for people who are coming in. We basically test out, can you do a full 20-page comic and 22 pages, can you tell a story and see how you are? And they were like, you can either do Superman or you do Batman. And he was like, don't say Batman because everyone says Batman. And I was like, what about Superman and Batman? Can I do a crossover? Can I do a team up? Which again, we were talking about how much I love team ups.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, no one's ever said that before. You should totally do that. So I did a couple inventory stories for Superman and Batman. And none of them ever came out because that was the whole thing. You do them just in case.
Yeah.
Right? In case script or whatever. But one day they did need one. But they were like, they called me and they're like, hey, we actually like one of these, but we want you to change it. We want you to take out Superman and Batman, and we want you to put in Supergirl and Damian. And I was like, that's a completely different story. Like, I mean, that is a ground level complete rewrite. I was like, so basically you're saying you want them to do a Halloween story. Because that's all it was. That was the only thing that was in common. They had Scarecrow in it. And they were like, yes, can you just completely start over and just do essentially the same story, but with them? And I'm like, again, that is a brand new comic book. So they paid me to rewrite it. And that was the first time I got to write Damian. And after I did that, I immediately was like, I want to write more Robin. Can I do a Robin book? And that was around, they were already gearing up. They were like heading in the direction to do, New 52.
Mm-hmm.
So they already had plans. All this, stuff was going on. But this whole time I've been asking about that book, and his voice in my head has never changed.
Mm-hmm.
Like even if I was reading other people's books and it didn't match up or line up with the way I heard him, it's never really changed. And so when I write him, I just write him the way I hear him. Like that's I don't know if I hope I'm not pandering to anybody. I just feel like I write him. I don't know. It's like I'm not trying to like write him in a way that is like appealing to a younger audience. This is one of those books that I just hear that kid talk in my head, and I write what he is saying.
Yeah,
that's
no,
it.
for sure.
Like it's just. Yeah, I don't know if I'm necessarily trying to write him. I mean, that book is funny because, like, I again, I have a lot of fun doing it. I hope I'm really entertained by it. I'm hoping that other people are entertained by it too, because I have a lot of fun doing it.
And honestly, that first, because I've only read the first half of the backups because I wait 2 weeks to get mine because I wait to get paid, so I get paid in the next. But yeah, that first Damian backup was great. It's a good time.
Thanks, man.
A second question I have is I think with every comic book writer working for Marvel or DC, there's a really old obscure character that they all really want to write at some point, but in like not just like the JSA, but like someone that wouldn't sell ever. No one's ever going to read this character again. No one wants to touch this character again, type of thing. But I feel like everybody has one of those. Do you have one?
I don't think so, because I'm not sure how I word this. I'm trying to look. I guess I feel like, I don't know. I think part of the problem I'm having with this is that none of the characters are obscure to me.
That's totally fair. I mean, Tom got Omega Man off the ground, so.
But see, even when you say that, that's not obscure to me.
Yeah,
like that's.
Yeah.
That's not a deep cut, dude. Like, there's a book I'm working on right now. That hasn't been announced yet. That has the Weird in it. Do you know who the Weird is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Like
I
the
do.
Weird
I do.
is. Yeah. So it has the. See what I'm talking about? So it has the Weird in it.
Yeah.
He's only in it for the one issue, but it's like things like that. I'm like, that's still not that obscure to me. Like, to me, I mean, I know too much. Like, I had to look back here at my wall, and I'm like, I would love to write a Lobo book. I've always wanted to write a demon
But like,
book.
Lobo's getting a book now.
Yeah, I know that Lobo Crush one. It's real good, dude.
It looks
That
good.
one
It
is,
looks great. That's on my list.
like, I don't know if I'd ever want to write Metamorpho, but Metamorpho might be obscure to
But
some
Metamorpho's
people.
in the Urban Legends book.
See, here's the thing: like, all those characters are in something, and I don't
fair.
know what. That's why I have a hard time with the word obscure, because I'm like, what is obscure at this point? It's like we were just saying, it's like all the characters I would want to write in the JSA, all those characters are not obscure to me.
Yeah,
So
no,
I
for
don't
sure.
know who would be like an obscure character at this point for me. That's my challenge to it. But I guess at this point, there's no. I feel like I could sneak them all in there at some point.
Yeah, probably.
Like I could figure out how to get a character that if I was like, no one knows this character is, but I'm gonna get him in there. I feel like I could. I feel like I could find a way to get most of these characters, even if it's just for a line of dialogue or something. I feel like, I mean, back to Flash. That was the whole thing on Flash, was that like I kept trying to do a Doctor Alchemy arc,
Mm-hmm.
and because of the way things worked out, the Doctor Alchemy arc never happened. Like, he was supposed to be the villain of. He was supposed to be one of the villains during the beginning. I think it wasn't Force Quest. He was supposed to be the villain a couple times, and it never worked out. And I was always like, oh my god, I just want to write Dr. Alchemy. I want Dr. Alchemy. And so then when we had talked about me leaving the book, they were like, what would you do if you stayed? And I was like, I would do Dr. Alchemy. I would finally find Dr. Alchemy. And I was like, he's the one villain I never wrote. And they were like, okay, cool. Then the person who's taking over the book after you for a little bit, they're gonna do a Dr. Alchemy arc. And I was like, that's fine. And then but I was like, okay, here's the deal though. In my very last issue of the Flash, we have to cut Dr. Alchemy just for one panel where he'll basically be like, I'm coming for you or something, like total trouble, something, right?
Yeah.
Just like I said, I wrote it once. And so that's why Dr. Alchemy's in there. I can't think of anything that's like obscure though, dude.
I don't remember. Did you get the top into your Flash?
Yeah, I got the top in there. I got the top in there a couple times. The top was funny because that was the one that they didn't want me to use at one point, because like no one knows what top is, and I'm like,
The top was one of my favorite characters in the Johns run.
Yeah, me too. So I got him in there. Yeah, I borrow some of the stuff from the Johns run too. Like some of the little dialogue he says and stuff is like from me going back and reading the top stuff. But yeah, that's why that was part of why he was I used him specifically in the first Flash annual with Wally, where it was Wally dealing with like his feelings. He met Magenta. That's why I used Top very specifically, because of Top's having his mind messed with. Because Barry's mind was also kind of messed with. That I very specifically picked him for that scene because of that. But yeah, I wrote the Top. I feel like there's no character that was that obscure that I didn't find like a place for. I don't know. I feel like most characters I could sneak in at this point. I mean, there's gonna be some stuff in Infinite Frontier that I'm like, no one is gonna care about this but me.
I'm just gonna tweet at you when I see it, and I'm like, thank you.
There's gonna be some characters in there that I think people are gonna be like, what?
And that's what makes me excited. I love it.
Or there are people are gonna be like, I know who that character is. Why are they here? I don't know. It's gonna be super weird.
And last question is, can we expect? Because I talked about it like at the beginning. I love the Masks and Mobsters book. Can we expect more crime stories at some point?
Yes. I have a couple create your own things I'm working on. There is a DC book that I'm working on. I'm actually done writing it. I have to do some notes on it, but I'm basically it, and it hasn't been announced yet. Like I've already wrote all of it. And it's a crime story. It's very much like a really gritty. It's a really gritty crime book with DC characters that I think will be surprising to people what we do with it. But it's very much like a noir crime book with DC characters. But but yeah, like I have a couple other create your own things I want to do, but that was probably it's weird because I wrote this crime book that's very different. I don't know. I'm really curious what they're gonna think about it when they finally see it, because it's not gonna look like anything else. But it's very much like it's gonna look, dude. Like it looks like a create your own book, but
That's exciting.
Yeah, it's
You
gonna
keep
be
telling me
really
exciting things. Nothing bad coming out. So again, I just want to thank you, Joshua, for coming on and talking to me for a while. What's your Twitter handle so people can just see when the stuff's coming out?
Yeah, just grab me at Williamson_Josh. I feel like that's the best place. That's where I post anything. That's really the best place to get like previews and stuff. I only answer questions occasionally. It's like if you catch me in between the hour of like 7:30 and 8, like every once in a while I'll answer a couple questions, but for the most part, that's the best place to know where things going on, and I do try to answer questions occasionally.
I lucked out shouting into the ether, and you listen, so.
Yeah, I try every once in a while. I mean, really podcasts. I like doing podcasts more than any other kind of interview because it's just us.
I just love talking. Yeah, I just love talking to people who love comics. That's the point of the show.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, for sure.
And Rob, isn't the final cutoff for Robin the FOC like this Sunday?
Yeah, this Sunday. Yeah, Sunday. Yeah, so every day I'm pushing.
100%. I think this is going to be one of the best books from Infinite Frontier. Like I really am excited.
Thanks, man. Thank you.
Maybe it's just because it's Connor Hawk, but I'm just excited for it.
Yeah, he's only in issue 1 like a little, and then in 2 he's in it more. And then 3 he's in a lot, and then he's in a lot more after that. But it's like a build. But I don't want it to be so sudden, like throw everything at it, because it's still a Robin book. I want to set stuff up.
Yeah.
But I think the scene, there's a really long scene between him and Damien where they basically talk about who they are. Like they really just, it's like, I'm the son of a superhero, and he's like, so am I. You know, and they have like an actual conversation about it. And that's one of my favorite things I've done for DC, is the two of them just having a moment of like two people who are like sons of superheroes, and just talking about, you know, what that is and the weird things they have in common, and just kind of bouncing off each other. It's like one of my favorite scenes I think I've done for DC.
And so for this show, you can find us on Twitter at Comics Matter Pod, Facebook at facebook.com/comicbooksmatter. You can email me at comicbooksmatter@gmail.com. If you have any questions for future guests, want to be a guest on the show yourself, or have a story you want read on the air here, you can reach me on any of those places. The new logo for the show is done by my friend Andy Manley, and the other logo is done by my friend Steven. The theme is Join the Restaurant by David Szesztay. And lastly, everybody, always remember, Captain America always punch Nazis.